Hello, guys, and welcome back to another episode of Unscripted. We're going to be taking a look at a video from this guy's YouTube channel called Maneko64. He's a guy who stays in the UK. He analyzes a lot of, if you recall, economic affairs around the world. He has a lot of interesting guests on his channel, and this is basically a continuation of episode 1 when we were speaking about the Queen and how she recently passed, and some people were saying that she did a lot of good things for the colonial countries that she conquered. So this is another perspective of how we see the system that they put in place, the colonial system that they left for Africa and the global south, and how we actually what we actually think about it. This is a perspective from the global south. So basically, we're just looking for the truth. I'm not against the Queen. She did what she did for her people, or for benefit of her selected ones that she wanted to benefit. But us in the global south, we have a different perspective about the Queen and the colonial powers. And we're just going to be dialoguing with the community. Anyone in the chat can offer their input. Let me know if I'm wrong. I'm not saying that I'm 100% right. We are searching for the truth. So let's watch this video and see.
The only way in which this can be stopped is by the United States dollar continuing to be the global reserve currency, which already is no longer the case. In my view, therefore, the collapse of the US economy is imminent and inevitable.
This is Professor Beniera from South Africa. I think he's a senior fellow there, and he also has a lot of interesting perspectives on economics from the global south. He has some interviews on the South African Broadcasting Corporation channel. So if you want to check out more from him, you can also check that channel and search for Professor Beniera.
Monaco64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Professor Evaristo Beniera. He's an associate professor of African politics in the Department of Political Sciences at the University of South Africa, or better known as UNISA. He has a PhD in African politics from UNISA and an MSc in international relations from the University of Zimbabwe. And the reason I have Professor Beniera on is because I listened to him on a South African Broadcasting Corporation YouTube interview, and I found it very interesting what he had to say about the BRICS summit in June this year.
This is another thing, guys. A lot of people like to talk about racism and this thing. Most people in the world aren't racist, including white people. Yes, there are a lot of white Americans and people that were taught to be racist, but inherently people aren't racist. Everyone is going through their problems and they're blinded by their issues. So everyone always look for someone else to blame. So the system created ways for you to blame the other race, to create division so they can remain in power. So if you really take off your blinders, especially most of the African Americans who just hate all white people. Not, I can't say all of them, but there's a good few of them that doesn't listen to anything that white people have to say. And that is not the case, guys. There's many things that black people say that would throw you off. For example, Martin Luther King. He was a black man that led a lot of black people in the wrong way. That's another video again for you to get more into that. But there are a lot of people that we think are on our side but aren't on our side, and people that we think are enemies that are not our enemies. So this is just another video showing you that these are two people from two backgrounds, different backgrounds, who see eye to eye on geopolitical issues.
And also about the potential of a new BRICS currency and what it means not just for the global south, but also for the United States and its allies. So again, Professor Beniera, thank you for accepting my invitation and welcome.
Thank you very much for the invitation to come and share my views on this platform, which I find very useful as an alternative source of knowledge. The biggest challenge that we face today is that of the major narrative and how minor narratives are not only being given chance, but have almost been disregarded. So an opportunity to discuss these important views, such as the reserve currents on this platform, are much welcome. Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. So let's get on with it. You mentioned it in your interview with the South African Broadcasting Corporation that the U.S. has abused its political power with the reserve currency. Could you go over that a little bit?
Thank you very much. And for the benefit of those that did not watch the interview that I had here in Pretoria with the national broadcaster, the South African Broadcasting Corporation, let me rephrase the argument which I made that morning, and I will make it in 4 points. The first part is that the United States dollar is not a currency, as most of us would want to think, but it is a political instrument for the United States and its allies.
Guys, remember yesterday I mentioned this, and people were saying that the Queen was more humane and all that stuff. She was more humane in her approach. To a certain extent, you can say that, but many people, the Queen was also ruthless. But not talking about that part, but let's talk about what he just said about the dollar. The US dollar is a political instrument used to do lots of harm. So that's the way that they used to colonialize Africa, using the dollar, using the pound. This is how they used. So this is going to break down how the system that the Queen that just died left, how it crippled Africa and the global south.
So when we look at the United States dollar, we must not see an innocent currency, but we must see an extension of a foreign policy, a political instrument, and one of the most potent weapons of mass destruction in modern history. That's my first observation. The second observation is that there is a point in history when the United States dollar became the global currency. Similarly, there will be a point in time when the United States dollar will cease to be the global reserve currency. And my argument is that
Yes?
we are witnessing the birth of a new global economic order.
Yes.
Number three, I
Very
want to
true.
observe that the current developments are a result of the politicization not only of the United States dollar, but also of the International Monetary Fund's special drawing rights. These are this abuse of the IMF's SDR is a major motivator for the development of an alternative reserve currency by what is known as the Global South. And finally, an alternative to the United States dollar hegemony, in my view, will stabilize a bipolar or a multipolar global economic order.
Guys, just to be frank with you guys, he's not the only one saying this. There are many people that are saying it. Even Putin himself made a speech in June at the BRICS summit, the Russian summit. I can't remember the name of the summit, but they had a summit in June where all these countries meet from the BRICS Union, and he made that declaration. You understand that they're making a shift away from the fiat current system into a new system backed by commodities and their own resources, and they even have their own crypto, their own blockchain technology. Also, Russia and China also already have their own systems.
So this is how I framed my discussion when I gave that interview to the South African National Broadcasting Corporation.
You also spoke about the fact that by having your independent reserve currency and not being dependent on a political currency like the US dollar is a sign of sovereignty. Could you go over that aspect of a new reserve currency and how that could help the global south?
Here he said, sovereignty is connected to currency. If a currency has no power, the country has no sovereignty. It has no independence, no power outside. Can't have no respect internationally if a currency has no power. So it's very important your currency. That's why I was saying depending on the dollar, the pound, and the euro is actually making you dependent on the UK and these European systems for you to survive, and you have to abide by these people's political structure, these people belief systems like in homosexuality and all these things they want you to take into your country just to get money. Came here and spread this one. Obama came to Africa spreading this gay rights shit, and if you didn't accept it, maybe you wouldn't get the American dollar, so you would be crippled again. So they force you to accept their way of thinking also. And they're talking about China and Russia. If China and Russia take money from Africa, they don't bring their belief system here. They let people be who they are. They don't kind of change your religion. They don't try to change your belief system. They don't try to make people believe that they need to be Russian. They just want the money. So it's a business deal. No, nothing is wrong with business. Everyone is looking to help each other's country, but the deal you guys are coming, you guys want to control and manipulate Africa instead of coming to conduct business. This is the biggest problem that you guys have been doing since you guys made contact with Africa. You guys had this plan and the plan is failing, as you can see. How long did it last, guys? How long was the world existing? So you only made it worse for yourself in the long run.
Certainly. A reserve currency is not just an agreed upon way of undertaking international trade. It is an underwriter of sovereignty. So what it means is that you trust our economic system and we trust our economic system, and there is a symbiotic trust between members of the BRICS group. That way, they are not only reasserting themselves, but they are reclaiming their sovereignties that had been usurped predominantly by the global north. So the use of the US dollar as a global reserve currency had serious repercussions for national sovereignties of otherwise independent states. I can give the example of my native Zimbabwe. It is one of the biggest producers of gold, yet to date it does not have a currency. It means it does not have a sovereignty. So by having an alternative reserve currency that is being bankrolled by the BRICS bloc, what we see is a reclaiming of state sovereignty by members of the global south. Stated differently, this is the beginning, in my view, of the demise of the West as the center of everything. Slowly but surely, the global south is beginning not only to assert itself, but to claim its sovereignty. And this is one of the biggest ways of making such a statement, that we are no longer prepared to rely on the US dollar as a medium of conducting business amongst ourselves. We will use our own currency. And this has got major repercussions, especially for the United States economy.
You guys hear it for yourself. That is the perspective from Africa and African countries. So you guys see that we actually lose faith in the American dollar and that fiat system. So it's only a matter of time. This is why you see all the pressure on your economy, and they're blaming it on all these things, on Russia and all these things. They don't want to tell you that the source of all their resources, they started to turn their back on them. Africa has all the resources that fuel the world. If you're into technology and you want all of these materials for electric cars and your iPhone and all that stuff, you're dependent on Africa. So all the luxuries in the West. I was talking to a friend recently. He says he lives in Denmark, I think, and he gets, I don't know if it's free money or what, but he says to get money every month from the government. So this money is coming from Africa. These countries don't produce anything as much. How these people could be getting free money from the government? I don't know if they're trying to, if it's everyone that gets this money or not. But when I heard that, I said, "Wow! Imagine people getting free money. If you were to tell an African about free money or anything from the government, it's like you're talking jokes to them. Nobody even know that it's possible to get something from the government in Africa. There's no surpluses. The money has no value. And the resources the Africans already have access to, so what can the government give them? The government's supposed to be bringing in modernization, technology, industrialize the country, but if they can't do relations with even the neighboring African countries, how can you expect us to move forward? This is why this system is actually moving forward so quickly, because there's a desperate need for African countries to do trade with each other and with Russia and China without using the American dollar, so nobody can manipulate the deals.
Yes, the other day I was taking a cab actually, and I started speaking to the cab driver, and he was originally from Kenya. He'd been here for almost 30 years, and we started talking, and he said that the way the West colonized Kenya was good for the West, but not good for the Kenyan people. But apparently, according to him, and he goes back regularly, Africa.
And bear in mind, guys, what he said that the Kenyan said, that it was good for the West but not good for Kenya. This video came out before the Queen died. So this was the African thinking long before the Queen even died. We already knew that we get the worst end of the deal when the West came to Africa. All people know, from the educated to the uneducated, everyone is aware of the shitty end of the stick that we were dealt in the deal of colonialism.
And maybe in South Africa as well, not just Kenya, they trust more the Russians and the Chinese to collaborate with them fairly. Isn't there, I'm going to be a little bit of a devil's advocate, could it be that the major powers of the BRICS blocks, like China and Russia, will do the same thing the US will do eventually? Is that a concern?
Look, the debate is still ongoing and the jury is still out. Whether by going to Russia and China and away from the West, is Africa not moving from one devil to the other? But what people in my circles are saying is that...
Guys, you gotta pause it here. This is one of the things I was talking about yesterday when Tucker Carlson said that China is going to be our new colonial master. So this same thing, he's trying to be devil's advocate. So he's bringing the opposite side. Even before Tucker Carlson said, so I think everyone is aware of what the opposition has to say. So it's not that we're seeing it from one side. This discussion was happening, you see, the 25th of August 2022. I'm going to stop pausing it now, let it play, because we have a lot to play. This interview itself is going to explain everything. I'm going to put the link to this interview in the channel, so if you want to hear it uninterrupted, you can just watch the interview. But I'm going to stop talking for a little while so we can get a good drift of the interview, and maybe at the end I'll have a short recap and my thoughts about what has been said. So I'm going to let it play for a while now, guys.
Be that as it may, China never colonized Africa. Brazil never colonized Africa. Russia never colonized Africa. In fact, it is the former Soviet Union, it is the former Yugoslavia, China, that who came to the rescue of Africa when Africa was fighting for its political independence. So there is that resonance that goes back to the colonization and the subsequent decolonization of Africa. So the bond between the BRICS countries and the global South in general is cemented in their common history, that they have been almost on the same side. The extension of that argument is that when the United States and the NATO allies invaded Iraq, unlawfully so, when they invaded Libya, unlawfully so, when they did the same to Syria, unlawfully so, they were never condemned, they were never sanctioned.
Yes.
And now the argument is that the global South must join them in condemning and isolating Russia. And the argument from the global South is that it's time for us not to be bullied anymore. We are now standing up to our national interests. If Russia is good for us, we will associate with Russia. And this is the message that is coming from India. India continues to buy the oil from Russia, and South Africa continues to maintain its strategic ambiguity posture towards both Ukraine and Russia. The bottom line is that Africa is more comfortable with those countries that assisted it during its decolonization processes more than it is comfortable with those that colonized and subjugated it. And some of them continue to benefit from their colonial infrastructure, which, by the way, is very difficult, if not impossible, to dismantle. Because as I speak to you today, I'm speaking to you in English. This is a language that was introduced to Africa as part of the colonial processes, and it is still the language of business. So
But the Queen of England,
here in Africa, here in the global south, we are better off with Russia and China and the BRICS bloc with their deficiencies than we are with America and the global north.
Without language, we've taken away our language, or it's like taking away our ability to communicate with each other, which is a major part of trading. They forced us to be speaking English and French and all these different languages that were not local to us. Just to show you an example of how this colonialism hurt Africa in many ways.
I see. Could you talk a little bit about President Gaddafi or Muammar Gaddafi and what happened to him when he tried to introduce the, I think it was a gold dinar for Africa?
The truth comes out in drips and drabs. So Colonel Muammar Gaddafi was one of the people who was championing the idea that Africa must be united, the idea that Africa must have its own currency, which was based on a gold dinar, because the gold is mined here in Africa, and that on top of the gold, we must have our own standby force. And also the Colonel Muammar Gaddafi was championing the idea that African petroleum must first be sold at cost to African countries. Obviously, that did not resonate well with the capitalist ideals, the neoliberal ideals of the global north. And some, especially Horace Campbell, believe that this is the main reason why the Colonel Muammar Gaddafi was assassinated. And this is the main reason why Libya today is a failed state with almost 3 capital cities, 3 parliaments, and so many armies and so many militias. It is because Libyans are being punished for championing the autonomous independence of Africa based on, firstly and most importantly, the launching of a gold dinar. There are 3 ways that the system, by the system I mean the colonial system, deals with you if you are not towing the line, so to speak. Firstly, it will try to absorb you. If you refuse to be absorbed, the system will try to discipline you.
Pause this here, yo, I'm getting strikes. You know YouTube, I'm music. You know YouTube. Come here, these
refuse to be disciplined, the system will then dispense you. I think the third option is the one that befell Colonel Muammar Gaddafi. It is not an item of debate today that Libya is worse off today than it was during the time of the so-called dictator Muammar Gaddafi. It is not an item of debate that Iraq is worse off today than it was during the time of the so-called dictator Saddam Hussein. It is not a secret that Syria is worse off today than it was before they tried to dispose Omar the president. His name is just escaped.
Yeah.
Bashar al-Assad. So what we see is that the Western way of doing things is either you are absorbed, you are disciplined, or you are dispensed, and there is no disregard for the actual human rights of the citizens. This is the lesson that we have learned over the years.
Yeah, that's the strategy of the economic hitman. I don't know if you've heard of John Perkins. He used to work for the Americans, and they did the same thing. Well, they did that strategy in Latin America, Africa, Asia, everywhere.
Correct.
Yeah. And it's interesting that Libya, even before Gaddafi was killed and Libya was invaded, I had been doing research about Libya, and it was the the country in Africa with the highest income per capita. So it was a very well-to-do country before they got rid of Gaddafi. Could we?
Bear that in mind, guys. You hear what he said? And he's an economist that was working in England for many years. So you see that Barack Obama killing Gaddafi, and you guys was parading Gaddafi. Everybody said he did a great thing, and since that to now, Libyans have been suffering since that. So all the things that you guys have been seeing in the US have been lies all along. You really need to look from the other side and see how things are really affecting us. Nobody's really against the people of America or people of the US. It's the leadership that have been lying to the masses for so long, that have been corrupting society, corrupting the world as it is right now.
You spoke earlier, and I didn't follow up on it, on the implications of a challenge to the dollar and maybe a little bit the euro's preeminence as reserve currencies. Could you go over the implications for the US? And I assume these implications for the US will also affect US allies like the UK greatly as well.
So the background to the development of a BRICS reserve currency is that, firstly, Russia pulled out of the International Space Station, and we could see that there is an alternative that is in the making. The second development that happened was that China and Russia then announced this reserve currency. And then thirdly, China pulled out of 8 international agreements with the United States of America. And fourthly, China carried out some military drills around Taiwan after the visit of Nancy Pelosi. And the reaction of the United States was to send the Secretary of State Antony Blinken to Africa to reassert the importance of Africa to the United States. But while that is happening, there are some background innuendos that are happening. For example, that the United States has almost $31 trillion in debt as we speak, hugely indebted. And that the United States cannot be a superpower.
Look on Biaggi. See how much debt they have? 3 trillion. How much? And they want us to believe that Africa is suffering. Yani. That's Ivy. This life is like, people are just looking at what the media is saying. They're not looking behind what the media is saying. In Africa, life just goes on. Everyone's life is continuing normal. Nobody's worrying about what's going on around America or England. Life is normal here like yesterday. The day before, nothing changed that much. As you can see, children still crying. Families still living around doing stuff. Life continues here. Children, this Sunday here, it's early 7:30 a.m. in the morning. You can hear how much people are up and about already.
It cannot finance its prisons. It cannot finance its welfare system, its retirement programs, if foreign countries and foreigners do not buy its debt. In other words, if the United States the United States dollar stops being the global reserve currency, the United States will lose its superpower status, because its superpower status is not only underwritten by its military stature, which is questionable, but most importantly, by its currency. So the United States needs the US dollar to remain being the global reserve currency so that it can continue being a superpower. It can continue financing its internal affairs, such as the prisons, the salaries, and everything. It also needs the foreigners to buy its debt. Right now, most of the debt is sitting with China.
But China?
Without the United States dollar being the global reserve currency, interest rates in the United States and those economies that are structurally embedded to the US economy will see a rise in interest rates. They will see it being very expensive to finance debt, and there will be a very huge balance of deficit, especially in the United States. The budget will be very difficult to balance, and this budget is one that is increasingly relying on deficits. And I am seeing all this crumbling in the absence of the status of the US dollar as the global reserve currency. Stated in a nutshell, the United States economy will suffer irreparable damage never seen before should the US dollar cease to be the global reserve currency.
And by that you mean massive inflation, right? Because all those dollars that are abroad right now being used as reserves are going to come back home. Is that right?
It has been argued that Fort Knox is empty, that there is no gold in Fort Knox, that the US dollars are just pieces of paper without any backing of the gold standard. After all, President Nixon recalled and then cancelled that arrangement.
Yes,
So
indeed.
when the US dollar ceases to be the global reserve currency, all the United States dollars that are circulating globally will come home to an empty Fort Knox.
Chickens
That
not
will
going to roast.
fuel not only inflation, but something beyond inflation, which threatens to collapse the whole United States economy. So,
Sorry.
so the
Like
only
chicken
way
not
in
roast,
which
that's how
this can be stopped is by the United States dollar continuing to be the global reserve currency, which already is no longer the case. In my view, therefore, the collapse of the US economy is imminent and inevitable.
Yeah.
And I guess that would be the same for like the UK and our
Yeah.
the US's Western allies, or like the NATO countries, right?
Yeah.
Their currencies are interlinked and they are umbilically interlinked. The United States dollar, the euro, the Great British pound, and all the EU member country currencies, they are interlinked together such that if one sneezes, the rest will catch the cold. Remember the old adage, if the United States sneezes, the world catches the cold. This is now being ameliorated because they are now going to be two separate systems. By the way, there is something that is being developed. It is an alternative to the SWIFT system. I have forgotten its name. If it comes up my mind.
This is the blockchain technology he mentioning here now, guys. This is the part that I heard. This is the part I heard first, and then I decided to react to the whole video. But this is the part that I actually somebody sent this part to me.
I will share it with you. It's called the contingency reserve arrangement. So this is something. No. I will think about its name.
That the Russian one?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's called the what? There is an alternative that is already in place to the SWIFT system. So slowly, the United States dollar is becoming, I don't want to use the word useless, but I want to look for another term, which is maybe 40% of the world are no longer using the US dollar as their reserve currency because Iran, India, China, Brazil, they're already trading using their own currencies.
Yes.
And this takes away about 40% of the global population away of the United States sphere of influence, the United States dollar sphere of influence.
This is causing all of these.
So I've got the alternatives to SWIFT here. One is the cross-border interbank payment system, or CIPS. That's the Chinese one. And then the Russian one is the SPFS.
System of transfer of financial messages.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, that's interesting what you said there about countries like Russia, China, India, and they're all already trading with their own currencies, and that's like 3 billion people abandoning in the global market, abandoning the dollar. So that's interesting as well what you said about Fort Knox. There's a lot of debate about that. And we've noticed that a lot of the BRICS nations, even Brazil, which I had followed, bought a lot of gold last year, and they're still buying a lot of gold. Do you think they know what's coming and they want to be prepared for this meltdown of the dollar? So you have to have gold to protect your reserves?
A lot of countries are very ambivalent about which way to go, left or right, because they can see the telltale signs that the US dollar reserve currency system is facing an imminent challenge. They are also noticing that on the alternative side, the BRICS reserve currency is an impending reality. So in order for them to 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 minimize the risk and exposure to their economies, they are piling up on the actual gold so that when the dust is settled, so to speak, they can then know whether to go with the BRICS reserve currency or whether to remain with the United States dollar currency. This is uncharted period for the world. We've never been in this moment before. Remember, the birth of the US dollar hegemony was it is something that grew after the World War One and World War Two, when the United States was funding post-war reconstruction. So the United States economy was actually built on wars. This is why some people are saying the Ukrainian war is good for the American economy, because after the Ukrainian war, the US dollar will be the main currency in rebuilding a post war Ukraine or a post war Taiwan, if you want to speculate that way. So we see the importance and the interlinkage between war and a reserve currency. The United States status as a reserve currency was born out of war, and some speculate that this is the main motivation behind the United States urging Ukraine to go to war with Russia, even if the stakes were highly placed in favor of the Russians and against the Ukrainians.
The same can be said for the reason why African economies are so broken, so that they will be dependent on these reserve currencies, so that they will have a reason for to print more export to us for debt. So they export all their debt to all these third world countries by keeping the economy broken. That the economy can never grow. That they do not need the dollar anymore. So if you are completely dependent on the dollar, they always have an easy way to get rid of their debt and just give us their debt, send it to us.
Yeah, and we're seeing now Boris Johnson, the prime minister here. Yesterday, he visited the Ukraine and he said, we have to accept high prices to fight for Ukraine. So it looks like the UK is right behind the US. And you also mentioned in your interview with the South African Broadcasting Corporation that reserve currencies and wars, the rise and fall of reserve currencies are always interlinked with war. And you've spoken just about that right now. But even though things look bad for the dollar, you said something that was interesting, that the US, of course, is not going to take this lying down. And maybe we could finish with your opinion on that and what it could mean for the world.
If indeed this is the day for the United States dollar, and if the most important asset of the US as a country, as a nation, is their currency, and if there is an existential threat to the United States dollar, the United States government, the politicians, and the United States oligarchs, we have for years profited from the exportation of war, will not take this lying down. What will they do? They will most likely try to destabilize this new arrangement. We see already that Russia is busy with Ukraine. China is going to be provoked into making some bellicose maneuvers in Taiwan, so that the biggest two economies that are propelling this reserve currency, i.e., China and Russia, are now busy fighting wars. And there is nothing that destroys an economy other than a war. the only way in which the United States dollar, in my view, can survive this onslaught, this challenge, is by having the Chinese and the Russian economies rapidly deteriorate. And one way of them to be induced into deterioration is to draw them into wars. China in Taiwan, Ukraine, and Russia. And if India also wants to be there, then India can be drawn into a war with Pakistan. My view is that the United States as a country will not take the demise of their currency lying down, because should that happen, the United States will become a typical third world country.
I'm gonna give a shout out to one of my subscribers here, now Dave K. In the last video, the first episode of Unscripted, he says when I become famous, he will be my security. So I got to say I will hire you as my security, as you see. They don't take this lying down. So when the rise of the southern countries, people like me start to rise, they will try everything to try to attack me. So I need guys like you, Dave, to come. Dave K, I give you a shout out. That just reminded me of you when they talk about security. That was a comment I got from the first video from one of my subscribers. So a shout out to Dave K. I gave a thank for the subscribing, and also thank you for the comment and the like. I appreciate all that stuff. I never tried to shout out all the people that make a valuable comment in the section below.
And do you think that's a big gamble by the United States? Because if you lose the war, then you lose you lose out. How do you rate China and Russia's ability maybe to win out?
For both China and Russia on one side, the United States, NATO, and the West on one side, this is an all or nothing war.
All or nothing.
So whoever is going to win the war will have their currency become or remain the global reserve currency. If the United States prevail, the United States dollar will remain the reserve currency. If China, Russia, and BRICS prevail, we will see the inauguration of a new global economic order.
I see. And do you think the dollar could come back despite all the debt that they have, even if they win this war?
You can never tell with the United States dollar. It has got many lives like a cat. It has died and it has risen, and you can never write off the United States dollar and the ability of those behind it from the days of John Maynard Keynes to always come up with new ways to reinvigorate and breathe life into an otherwise currency that could have faced its demise.
Yeah, and you said something about Cicero, what he said about wars. Could you go over that? I thought that was interesting.
Cicero said, show me the person who is supplying arms in a war, and I can show you the person who is capable of stopping that war. And that wars are a business that you will never make a loss. It is the only business in the world in which you will never make a loss.
That would be the banker, right? Because they finance both sides. But as nations do lose out, though, I would say.
Yes, the business people that are financing the arms, they are not counting the number of people that are dying in Ukraine or Russia. They are counting the rounds of ammunition which they have sold. They are counting the profit which they have made, which, by the way, is quadrupled. So war is very good for business, because war is a business in which you will never make a loss.
Great.
Guaranteed of a profit.
Great. Thank you very much for coming on. And yes, and hopefully maybe we can speak again in the future. And have you got any last words to the viewers? Because my viewers are everywhere. They're in America, they're in the UK, they're even in Africa and everywhere around the world. And I don't want to take sides here. I'm just trying to show people what's going on in the world.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity to say these last words. And my last words are that normally people argue among themselves about things that they've never experienced. I am sitting down in Pretoria right now. I can't stand up in Sao Paulo or in London. I can only stand up in Pretoria because this is where I am seated. Let me give you another
Yes.
example. When the pioneer column left the United Kingdom to come to Africa, what the people in London saw were brave men and women leaving the comfort of their homes to go and civilize a dark continent. That is not what we received here in Africa. Here in Africa, we received a brutalizing colonial system that is still impacting on us today
Uh-huh.
because our epistemes were displaced, our ways of knowing and doing were displaced. So there is never going to be a universal view because we can only stand up from where we are seated. So what I shared with you today is our perspective
You want
here
Tucker
in the
Carlson hear
global
this?
south, here in Africa, here in South Africa. This is what we are seeing. Somebody in Brazil, in London, in the United States could be seeing things differently. They are not wrong. That is what they are seeing. Let's share these perspectives. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Is what I saw Tucker Carlson and his viewers and get to hear that outro, that last part of the video there, because they're thinking that colonialism helped Africa, or we were civilized because of the Queen and their colonial rulers, France and those people. But as they can end it on a positive note, as you see, my name is Trey Trillionaire. I will be the first trillionaire. As you can see, Africa is on the rise, and I'm in the right place at the right time to be the first trillionaire. And you know, most of the time, I don't want to be biased, but black people are the first to do everything. So you know, I'm also black, and I'll also be the first trillionaire. Many ways to get there, and crypto will be one of them. So guys, stay tuned for the truth. And remember to always stay neutral, don't be biased. And Africans will always be givers and sharers. I'm not a selfish guy, I'm a people's person. So follow my journey to becoming a trillionaire. If you're one of the early subscribers, you will benefit even more in the future. So thanks again for watching, and stay tuned for episode 3, where we dive deeper into some more topics that the world is scared to talk about. And thanks again, and remember to subscribe and share the video with your friends and join the discussion. And before you forget, I also have some giveaways on my crypto section on my channel, so check out my crypto section. I'm giving away some Onyx, and for the Splinterlands fans, I give away some cars. I gave away a card to the first guy in my first video. He already got the Pelicar Deceiver. So you can also look out for those Splinterlands giveaways if you're into Web3 gaming and stuff. Because I'm also a developer, by the way. And thanks again, and goodbye, guys. Have a good day.